In this video, we're going to take a closer look at some of the nuances of working with instantiated prefabs. Now, in the last video, we created a prefab out of our little campsite here, including our tent, our fireplace, and the two little benches that go along with it. And we can see that prefab here inside our project view, and now our camp is highlighted blue. Now, what does that highlighting mean?
Well, the highlighting, or the blue, means that there's actually a link between it and the original prefab, which means it is actually currently an instance of that prefab. So it's kind of a copy, but it maintains its offsets, and there are certain values that you can change that make it slightly different than the prefab. In case in point is the transforms. We can actually still be connected to the prefab, but we can position it in another spot in the world, and it's going to remember that.
Now, we can illustrate that because at the end of the last video, we took the camp prefab we had created and we zeroed out its position, zeroed out its rotation, and of course its scale was still set to 1. However, if we take a look at the instance of our camp prefab here inside the hierarchy view, you'll notice its transforms are all establishing the location in the world, so they're not zeros.
Correct.
They're all offset from the origin. Now let's talk about instancing this camp prefab. So what I'm going to do is just kind of fly away from our little campsite here. And just for starters, I'm going to take our camp prefab and just drag it into the hierarchy. So we're just kind of adding a new instance of it into the scene. Now we'll see it pops up here at the top because of alphabetical order. And I'm going to select this and press the F key here inside the view and take a look at where it actually showed up.
Right, because we had zeroed out the transforms for our prefab, the original, it's almost like a template for how to create these objects. Because we zeroed those out, if you just drag it in your hierarchy, it's going to put it at the location that our prefab says to place it. But if we move it, it's going to remember where we moved it to.
That's right, which is important if we want to be able to take multiple instances of our prefabs and scatter them across our level. So let's go ahead and delete out this new instance we've created. And what I'm going to do instead is come over here next to this spooky little tunnel bunker looking thingy. And we're going to drag our prefab out of the project view and actually into our viewport. And as I do this, you'll see that it gets placed based on kind of a raycast operation right onto the surface of the terrain. So it's an easy way to place objects. We could, for instance, switch over to the rotate tool now and spin this around so that the orientation makes a little more sense for the particular position we're using. And we now have a second instance of this. It's very easy to do. In fact, if we wanted to have, say, multiple campsites, we could drag out as many instances of this as we like.
And each one is going to remember its transforms, its position, its rotation, and if you wanted to, even its scale. And each one of these are going to be independent.
Its scale, you say? You mean we could have a giant campground?
Yes, we could.
So there's our giant campground.
So now, each one of these, still being an instance, are still blue. So they're still maintaining their link to the original prefab. We haven't modified them enough to break the prefab or the link to the original prefab.
That's right. Now, I'm going to take my my gigantic camp. Oh, that's not my gigantic camp. I want to keep that one. Let's take the great big one, and I'm going to get rid of it because I don't really want the giant one. Now, let's talk a little bit more about this link and ways that we can utilize that link. I'm going to go back to my original campground. And if we take a look around here, if I get the trees out of the way, we'll see that there is a rock sitting on the ground next to our campsite. Mm-hmm. Now, what if, let's just say for sake of example, I had really intended that rock to actually be a part of this campsite. In fact, I'm going to go a step further with that. Let's say I moved the rock. So I've selected it. I've got the move tool out. I'm going to hold down the V key, and I'm going to drag this over here on top of our bench. I'm going to scale it down. So it'd be kind of a tiny rock. Or, well, I mean, that's not a little rock, but it's littler than it was for sure. And I'm going to put it right here in the middle of the bench. So it's kind of warming itself by the fire. So now we have our rock here.
Yeah, new meaning to the word pet rock.
That's right. It's just kind of loyally sitting there next to the fire, watching over it for us. And let's say we want this to become a part of the prefab. Well, let's take our rock, and here it is inside our hierarchy view. And this is the version of the camp we're looking at. Remember, we have two other versions, but those are over by our tunnel. I'm going to grab our rock and just parent it in here, and we will get a warning. We're about to lose this link to the prefab, because once we link this in, it will not be the same collection of objects.
Right. We've actually changed our instance of an object significantly enough that it is no longer the same as the original.
That's right. So let's go ahead and click continue, say we want to do that, and now check it out. Our original camp here is no longer highlighted in blue, so it is not an instance of the prefab.
Right.
It's now its own unique object. But one of the things we can do is select this object, and it remembers that it was once a prefab.
Right.
And we can apply any changes that we have made back up to the prefab level by clicking the apply button here inside the inspector.
Right. This is like we were talking about the example in the last video with having a street light and your supervisor saying that, you know, he wants to adjust the light. Let's say the supervisor goes, I want a rock on every camp in this thing. So, or in your scene. So what you're doing is by hitting apply, you're adding a rock to the original prefab, which means
that change will then trickle down to all instances of that prefab. So now if we grab one of these other camps and hit the F key to fly over there, check it out. They all have rocks sitting on their second bench as well. Now, if at some point we should suddenly decide, hey, you know, I really don't like that anymore. I don't think that was really for me. We can take the rock on any one of these. And let's just say we're picking on this guy here. So let's expand this, and here's our rock, and I'm going to unparent this guy. So I'm just going to pull him out and stick him out here in the hierarchy. And again, we get the problem. It says, losing prefab, are you sure you want to do this? And we'll click continue. So now this guy is no longer highlighted in blue. Once again, we've made a unique object. But it remembers, once more, that it was at one time a prefab. So if we click apply, and take a look at our other campsites, that rock disappears. However, it's interesting to note that it didn't just get unparented from these guys, it got destroyed.
Yep.
Because Unity said, oh, well, that rock shouldn't be there anymore. And Unity's not going to take the time to go like, oh, well, should I unparent it? Should I go stick it some other place in the hierarchy? It's just going to say, no, that shouldn't be here. Kaboom. It's going to kill it.
Right. Now, let's back up a little bit and show one other part that we can do. Let's go ahead and take that rock and parent it back into that camp.
Okay, let me make sure I have the right camp selected. So it's the one at the top. And there we go.
All right. Now, go ahead and apply that to all of our prefabs.
And
we should get
actually see
back.
the rock appear, which is great.
So let's go to the other camp real quick.
The first one?
No, the other one on the other side of the tunnel.
Okay.
All right. Now, let's unparent that rock.
Okay, so here we are, and we'll just drag that out here into our hierarchy and click continue.
All right, now let's move him out of the way.
All right, so we'll slide him over here, and I'll put him on the ground.
Right. Now, let's say you've unparented him, you've broken your connection to the original link, you move him out, and you realize, you know, I really didn't want to do that after all. Now, instead of having to reparent him, you can reconnect yourself back to the original prefab.
And if we click on the reconnect button, boom, we get a new rock that appears.
Right.
It's not the original rock.
Right. But because we've deparented that rock has lost its association with that prefab. It becomes its own object off in your scene, which you can delete manually or put somewhere else.
That's right. So that's a nice look at instantiation and ways in which you can change your instance object, update that to the prefab, and see how those changes to your prefabs trickle down to all of your instance objects. I think that covers everything that I wanted to discuss in this video. So thanks a lot.